To quote a loading screen from one of my favorite video games of all time, to kill for yourself is murder, to kill for your government is heroic, and to kill for entertainment is harmless. Before we get into specifics, I love Watchdogs 2, believe it or not. It is an open world game that I adore. Even with its tone and feel, I try to take it as seriously as I possibly can. I try to immerse myself in this semi-futuristic San Francisco filled with young people who are trying to make a change. The subject of violence in video games is very extensive and complicated, and while this seemed like a good excuse to talk about games like Hotline Miami and Spec Ops: The Line, games that make interesting points regarding violence, they both let us know that it is simply in our nature. We enjoy violence as the players, but it is merely a video game. It is entertaining, so it doesn't really matter. The sprites made of pixels we kill in Hotline Miami are meaningless, and in Spec Ops: The Line, they're just generic soldiers, so it doesn't really matter. I'm not gonna proceed to talk about these two, maybe some other time. Right now, let's just focus on Watch Dogs 2. Also, this was a missed opportunity to talk about The Last of Us 2, but since 90% of the internet is already talking about it or already talked about it, I don't think anything I say will be particularly remarkable or will add anything to the conversation per se. And I think very few people treat the game objectively or talk about it objectively. I think I don't want to take part in this conversation. It's just too controversial for me. I enjoyed the game, don't get me wrong, I did, but it's not something I will probably play again or think it's a masterpiece, because it is not a masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination, but it doesn't deserve a 0 or a 1 or a 2 or get reviewed on by a bunch of idiots either. The reason I say not speaking about The Last of Us here is probably a missed opportunity is because The Last of Us 2 is a game that is strongly focused on violence and revenge, but I think it's a piece of media that takes a lot from other pieces of media, especially Spec Ops: The Line, and you can even compare it a little bit to Hotline Miami, especially Hotline Miami 2 when it comes to speaking of violence, and it's a game that repeatedly kicks you in the head. I'm not gonna stretch this out any longer. I think Spec Ops: The Line did this way better. The only difference is that The Last of Us 2 had more budget and it's a newer game, so the violence is very cinematic and very horrific in comparison to older games, so I think that's why it gets a lot of attention, and because the narrative itself is driven by the concept of violence and revenge in the first place. But like I said, I'm not gonna stretch this out any longer, and I'll probably talk about this further when I make a video specifically about Spec Ops: The Line, but I don't have any intentions on making a video about The Last of Us 2. Now let's actually talk about Watch Dogs 2. In Watch Dogs 2, we control Marcus Holloway, a 24-year-old guy who is formerly a hacker. He is very skilled at parkour and driving, and if we so choose it, at combat as well. Unlike in the first game, the protagonist here I think is actually enjoyable to play as, and it is not a mediocre attempt to recreate a Walter White type of character, so we're not an edgy adult who's trying really hard to be Walter White. We play as a young guy from San Francisco who joins a group of hackers known as DedSec. First introduced in the first game, who are in constant fight with what's commonly called or commonly known as the CTOS 2.0, an intrusive software that spies on people and that it is planned to be present in most electronic devices in the future. That's the plot, or the villain in a nutshell, and the company who owns it, which is called Bloom. CTOS 2.0 has many problems when it comes to the software itself. One of them is that it can be abused by powerful people to hide crimes, gain political advantage, etc. So it makes sense that a group of young revolutionary groups is trying to take them down. Marcus, and our protagonist, was falsely accused of being the primary suspect in a high-tech robbery, which led him to start the fight against the system and eventually join the hacker group in the events of the game. Now that we're all up to speed with the plot, let's talk about the narrative problem that Watch Dogs 2 has, and that is the concept of violence. At the very beginning of the game, we are tasked to infiltrate a building stealthily. Then we are asked to delete the CTOS profile of Marcus to erase his false criminal accusation. In the info panel, they mention that Marcus carries a handgun. Immediately, a character is concerned by this and asks if this will be a problem in the future, which one of the other characters happily says no. Taking a look at the inventory, we immediately see that it is a taser gun. I was expecting a silenced 1911 like Aiden's, but no. Anyway, in the future, when you play further, we are capable of printing our own weapons in the main headquarters. A variety of weapons actually, custom made, some non-lethal and military-grade weapons. We're talking modified M416, 50 cal sniper rifles and AK-47s, everything we need to fulfill a revolution, supposedly. But we're fighting rich and powerful and kind of oppressive companies in a very crowded city with technology, and the fight is led by people in their early, mid, and late 20s. I hope you're starting to see the problem here. The game wants you to really try the stealth and non-lethal approach, essentially to minimize harm to others, and because murder isn't going to accomplish anything. And because of the context itself, we have to take into consideration that we're playing a 20-year-old something guy who's trying to make a change in his city and is followed by a bunch of people similar to him. We are not led to believe that they're cold-blooded killers. We are led to believe that they're ambitious people who are, I guess, morally good or trying to make a difference. The game invites you to play non-lethally with stealth takedowns and wants you to go undetected in most scenarios, to flee the police and not to engage them, to hack instead of to kill. It makes sense considering the context of the game. In certain occasions, the game plainly tells you to kill, to murder, because apparently it is the right thing to do. But the situation is quite peculiar because it sets you up. You're expected to be angry for a character that dies. They spend a couple of good hours building him as a likable character only to be taken out of the equation and for the player to get angry and seek set revenge, similar to how The Last of Us 2 uses one of its earliest cinematic and extreme violence to shock the player and to incite and justify the journey that lies ahead. But in this case, I think it is very inconsistent. In a mission, the FBI takes into custody one of our teammates and steals something from us, a mask. Just a mask. We have to get it back. How? Hacking and then infiltrating a facility. Do we kill the guy? No. Do we murder every FBI agent we see on site? No. We can, but the game doesn't want us to do that. We're just here for a mask. Tell me, even if DedSec hides their faces with masks, they have a logo and they're easily recognizable, plus the extravagant masks and appearance don't help at all, something that is heavily emphasized in the newest entry. But imagine in the local news, you see a report about a massive hacker attack. Who else but DedSec? Sure, there are a handful of small hacker groups, but those are easily differentiable because they lack morals, they are only looking to profit and don't care about said revolution. You can see that if you play the game by yourself. And even if we take the murderous path, the game simply assumes we took the peaceful way. The characters involved don't react accordingly, don't react like we committed mass murder. Near the end of the game, there is a section where the game wants us to kill with a grenade launcher. In another situation, the game forces us to kill once again. We are tasked to kill the leaders of a street gang that mess with us, simply kill for revenge because that is justified apparently. And the thing is, the game doesn't even acknowledge we did this. It says an eye for an eye, good. It doesn't beat you in the head for it, unlike Spec Ops The Line or The Last of Us 2. One does this better than the other, by the way, like I said in the introduction. But the thing here is, we're dealing with a morally good character like Marcus with charisma against two morally great characters like Captain Walker or Ellie, for example, which, considering their motivations and personalities, there's more room for a study of characters over there than here. Marcus is a more relatable and calm and charismatic person who has better moral compass. So I think this is very inconsistent. The problem with the whole revolution deal in this game is that we are operating outside the justice system. Even if we are doing good, we can't ask for help to the authorities. In fact, most of the police hates us as a hacker group, so we are left with vigilante justice. That form of justice is the one we as a group or human being apply based on our moral judgment, actions, and it is not backed up by the justice system, so we are left to be the judge and the executioner as well. Even if the system is corrupt, violence is never the right way to promote a movement. Even when we come face to face with the main antagonist of the game, we ultimately leave it to the police because it is the right thing to do, and the best way to send a message as DedSec is to prove they're only young people trying to protect the city from corporate greediness and immorality. And here's another instance where the game is completely inconsistent. You think a cold-blooded killer wouldn't want to kill the main antagonist, the person that caused them so much harm, not only to him, also to a bunch of other people. You think a murderous psychopath will do something like that? Of course not, but the game assumes we're not a murderous psychopath, but on the other hand, it allows you to commit mass murder like it's somehow justified. Like at the very end of the game tells you, okay, this is not your thing to do, go to the authorities. But in other instances, you can say the same thing, okay, go to the authorities, this is something very serious, maybe the FBI can get involved, maybe the CIA can get involved, I don't know. Someone can intervene here. But the game says like, no man, just grab your rifle and go kill everyone, because that's right somehow. So, a bunch of 20-year-olds running around with face masks and laptops supposedly are murderous psychopaths doesn't make much sense to me. Leave that course of action to characters like Trevor Phillips, at least you can sell that to the players, you know? The problem with setting up this non-lethal violence and the tone of the game is that ultimately the player has a choice, and most will think it is easier to simply take the violent approach. After all, it is what we are used to in most shooter games, right? Spec Ops even criticizes a player a bit for this behavior, which I consider myself guilty as well, and it is very hard not to, you know? After all, if you're stuck in a mission where you have to infiltrate a crowded building and the enemies will be hard to subdue or evade, what's easier? Tasing a few, steadily taking down some with your totally non-lethal melee weapon,
I need taking aim.
distracting some others and sneaking in, which could easily take you around 30 to 40 minutes in some cases, or pulling out the old Silence 1911 True to the Chicago Vigilante Aiden Pierce and simply pop a headshot and don't worry about the guy waking up. And we have to consider that a lot of people simply play the game. They don't have all day to play games and they just want to enjoy the story and not stop every 5 minutes to do a moral check when they're playing. They just want to play. Another good example that also tells you that this depends a lot on how much is the player willing to immerse themselves in the context of the story is when I play GTA 5 online with friends. I don't like shooting random civilians. I don't think it's fun and I don't think it's entertaining. I think it's actually quite weird or not pleasant to do. A friend doesn't really care, he just shoots them because it's just a game. I also don't think I have the right to complain about that. I do, because we're just friends, we're just talking. But I do it anyways, but in reality I don't think I do, because it's just a game and he's not checking the moral compass every 5 seconds, plus it's a game, you know, but if I'm immersing myself in the world of GTA Online, and the game is about being a criminal mastermind to a certain degree, and I like to think as my character as, I guess, a criminal, but not too bad, like not someone who will shoot random people on the streets. If I'm trying to kind of roleplay or give my character a sense of personality or autonomy, I think it will be someone who doesn't really like shooting random civilians because it's not right. Like, just focus on the criminal activities you're doing that doesn't involve killing innocent people. So I guess it is also my fault for immersing myself too much or for giving false personalities to bland characters. But that was just an example. Let's go back to Watchdogs 2. Another obstacle I see in the narrative is we're not shooting terrorists or soldiers or Nazis or zombies, we're shooting security guards, policemen in some cases, and the least good private security groups. Sure, we sometimes face violent street gangs, corrupt and amoral mercenary groups that shoot on sight, but those occasions are very limited. So, is it justified to kill for revenge? Is it justified to kill for a cause we think it is right? Is it justified to engage in violent encounters because that is the only form of justice we have? Do the ends justify the means? Well, of course not, but I guess it is ultimately to the player to decide, and this is simply a video game. And with the trailers of Watch Dogs 3, lethal violence is visible and I suppose encouraged to a certain degree, and we're back to square one where it doesn't really matter because it's a video game. It never really matters because it is a video game, but if you're selling the context of a non-lethal revolution or a non-lethal approach or less brutal city or a group of characters, just stick with that. Don't wander very far away from that. You know, every game is gonna talk about violence. Not every game is gonna beat you in the head over it or talk about philosophy, but at least a good portion of shooters wants you to don't really think about the people you're killing because you're there to have fun, and I think that's alright as well. I do want to give Watch Dogs 2 some credit for introducing an interesting concept and a story and narrative that invites you to immerse yourself in this world and assume the role of a specific character.
Hospitals. Hacker taboo, man.
Well, somebody did. They use ransomware to lock the doctors out of their own systems, and they're demanding millions. Surgeries are being postponed and prescriptions are on hold because the records won't load.
Oh, man, there's got to be a better way. Do we know what kit they use?
Ploxy.
Ploxy? Yeah, that's prime eight. I definitely wouldn't put it past Lenny and her crew to break taboo.
Well, it's been modified. New comments were mostly written in Russian.
Could be Brava then. Do we have a point of infection?
And the affected hospitals all rent servers from Streamer.
Perfect. I'm gonna check that out. And you guys keep doing whatever it is you're doing.
But it is not commonly seen in video games, and I think it is an open world game that stands out. Sure, other games like Disco Elysium do this as well, but I think Watch Dogs 2 deserves some kudos, and I think it's one of those games that I really enjoy, but I never really talk about because one, no one really cares, and two, I guess I needed a good reason to talk about this game because there's not much to talk about. I could just say it's a great game, which it is, but there's not really much to talk about. But I guess today I did have a reason to talk about this game, and you know, it's one of those games that I really enjoy because I bought it on the Xbox One, played it at least twice or 3 times, then bought it again on PC along with the DLCs, and I finished everything, and I'm considering doing a playthrough in the future, I suppose. What Watch Dogs Legion is doing is making the enemies more oppressive, more hateable and violent, so we kill them with no remorse because the game invites us to do so, and it is all for a great cause. A game that mimics this concept is Far Cry 5, making the enemies extremely violent, extremely cruel, and extremely oppressive, so we don't feel any type of remorse, and the things we're doing are 100% justified. Some may argue violence is necessary in certain revolutions. I agree that violence is necessary in instances like World War II, but in a progressive city like San Francisco, where no large group of people is really dying or being shot on the streets, and the main problem is a system and a company rather than a stronger and more violent force, it is up for debate. Once again, if you're doing a specific character, if you're doing a specific theme or context or tone, stick with it, because if you're inconsistent, it gets weird at times, and it causes an idiot like me to make a video like this. And I guess I really wanted the game to address those violent acts and at least give them some fuel for thought, you know, to the player and to Marcus, or maybe to Wrench or any of the other people who participate in said violent acts. But it's just something I want. I'm not demanding it, or I'm not saying games should address violence, every shooter should address violence, because it is not necessary. For example, a lot of people were complaining that Far Cry 5 wasn't political enough for some reason, and I don't think that's necessary. It's just something I wanted, but it's not something that has to be done. I also didn't have enough time to talk about the characters or anything else, but I really like Watchdogs 2. I like the world and the characters and the style, the game mechanics, the story, the music. Marcus and Citara are very cool. The character of Josh was very, very well written and thought. And I guess that's all I have to say about Watch Dogs 2 and the concept of violence. I'm gonna tackle Spec Ops The Line in a different video because I think it is an overlooked masterpiece. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, wear a mask. Goodbye.